Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Deborah Price, a member of the Board of Trustees of the club. Well, ladies and gentlemen, today the Columbus Metropolitan Club presents Madam Speaker Joanne Davidson, sponsored by my very own Ice Miller and the Capitol Square Foundation in conjunction with the John Glenn College of Public Affairs at OSU. Now let me please just take a moment of personal privilege to say to you that both of our guests today had a hand in my political upbringing. Joe Hallett, as an editor at the Dispatch, helped me to really understand that the press has a very rightful place in the political discourse. He was always very fair and honest, even when it didn't feel like it to me, but he taught me that the give and take of the press is invaluable, and our country could not exist without it. So thank you, Joe, for being part of my political career. And then, of course, my dear friend, Speaker Davidson, had more to do with teaching me the ups and downs and ins and outs, and most importantly, the rights and wrongs of political life than anyone else in my career. She's a very, very special person. She's a role model to me and to hundreds of other women. Many of you are here in this room today, and we all want to take a moment to say a very sincere thank you, Madam Speaker. So many of our sponsors have associates here and friends, and we want to take one more time to thank them for allowing us to be here today. And then without further ado, I'd like to welcome Trevor Brown, who is the Dean of the John Glenn College of Public Affairs, and he will introduce our forum. Thank you, folks. Dean?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me all right? I'm a little taller here. My name is Trevor Brown. I'm the Dean of the John Glenn College of Public Affairs, and it's a real privilege and honor to be with you here today. We're active members of the Columbus Metropolitan Club, and we're so pleased to sponsor this with Ice Miller and the Capitol Square Foundation. The Glenn College, and I speak on behalf of the Ohio State University, is a huge supporter of the CMC and its mission to create a forum for civil and public discourse. I wish the senator was still with us, because one of his great joys was participating in that fora, in that public space. And this is a really remarkable place to do that. So a big thank you to the organizers of the CMC for creating that fora. We have two just remarkable people that we're going to hear from today. Politics and all things public needs participants, need people that dive in and take up the mantle for all of us as citizens to make those difficult choices. And I think we absolutely, as you've just heard from Deborah, have a model of that in Speaker Joanne Davidson. But it also needs people to help us understand it, make sense of it, and Joe Hallett has been a model of that in his role in a variety of newspapers across the state. He also plays, like all good journalists, that role of holding good people like Joanne to account. And we need to remember in this era that there is a worthy role for both the players and the observers and critiquers of the players. So I know that we're in store for a really dynamic and engaging and thoughtful conversation. So please join me in welcoming our two honored guests. The first female Speaker of the House, Joanne Davidson, and former Dispatch reporter Joe Hallett.
Well, I'd like to beg your indulgence because it's been a while since I've done anything like this. In fact, I rarely shave anymore and often don't get out of shorts, t-shirts, or sandals. So this tie is pretty stifling. But I want to say that over many years as a reporter, I had the privilege to cover a lot of interesting public figures, but only a handful of giants. I would say Jim Rhodes, and, John Glenn, and George Voinovich, Vern Rife, and of course Speaker Davidson. As still the first and only female Speaker of the Ohio House, and as a former co-chair of the Republican National Committee, many consider her the most influential woman in the history of Ohio politics. So I'm truly honored that you requested that I interview you here. And before we get to your observations about the state of politics and, of course, the elephant in the room, Donald Trump, I think it's necessary to put into context just how remarkable it is to have you on this stage today. You go to your office every day and typically are the last to leave. You advise many different clients and are counselor to Governor Voinovich, to Senator Portman, and many other state, local, and national leaders. You speak at or attend rubber chicken dinners across the state, and you enjoy traveling abroad, especially to Italy with your friends. And even though Kurt Steiner once warned me not to bring up the age thing,
good morning.
Next month you will turn 90. So what keeps you going at such a hectic pace?
Maybe it's the competitiveness of being involved in the political system. I always explain that competitive urge here as growing up with 3 older brothers. So those of you that have done that, the women in the room will know what I mean. But it's ever since I started getting involved, it's a thing that makes my adrenaline flow to be part of, frankly, not just politics, but part of forming public policy. First in my city of Reynoldsburg, I started out as a member of city council, and then later came into the legislature. So, Joe, that's part of it. And I always go back to what Jack Ford said when obviously we were leaving the legislature, when term limits triggered in. He said, I always tried to get to the office before and leave after her, and I've never won that race. So I've got a reputation to live up to.
So you've accomplished so much during your career in politics and public policy. What more do you want to do? And when you think about it, what are you proudest of accomplishing?
Well, what more do I want to do, I think, is try to play a role in bringing a little more collegiality to the debate on public policy, more of a willingness to work across party lines in that situation. And as many of you in the room know, my long-term goal is also to have more women serving in public office or in some way participating in the discussion of public policy. So,
yeah, you can talk about the Joanne Davidson Institute. Some folks here might not know what that is, but it's had a pretty profound impact on a lot of women's lives.
Well, founded in 2000 as a result of some of my experience recruiting women, and the board chaired by Betty Montgomery, who is here. We are just going into our 17th year. We have one of our applicants to be in the class this year with us today, and we've had a chat with her. It's an effort to address the issues that really seem to keep women from running for office or being willing to run for office. And so we do a 8-month program, and we concentrating on making them comfortable with the political system. So many of them don't know it and kind of run up against that wall and don't know how to handle it. They have more confidence in their own abilities, and not to be so risk adverse. And lastly, don't wait to be asked, because women are actually have the reputation that if somebody would ask them, or maybe the other women in the room, we should ask more people, because clearly that's a factor. So we've now had about 350 women go through the program of recruiting for a class, Joe. So it has been one of my, what I think is one of the accomplishments that I treasure. My other accomplishment, I think, was just the process of getting to be Speaker of the House. It's not an easy process to do that. I probably, I have a lot of political friends around the tables here, but I probably did that with a little tutoring from Mr. Tilling over there, and how he managed some of those things in the Senate. But it's a difficult path. But what it does tell you is something that I will always remember. It is the relationships that you build. And so had I not had an opportunity, and it was usually from running the campaigns, Joe, as you know, to build relationships with so many of the members that were there, to get to know them, to get to know their families, to go to their weddings, that made a difference for me. And it was as much the process of moving to be selected as actually the privilege of serving as Speaker of the House.
Well, sadly, you're still the only leader of either house of the Ohio legislature in Ohio history. And I want to ask you why you think that is. And two, when we were talking the other day, you mentioned to me that some advice you often give to women in the legislature is don't get pigeonholed.
That's right.
You want to talk about that?
Well, women have a tendency, because our experiences are different, and we have a tendency to actually deeply care about certain issues: child support, child abuse, domestic violence, other opportunities for women. And it took me a little while to catch on as a new legislator that if the majority of the people, members of the Institute, could pigeonhole a woman into that narrow look at public policy, they lost their ability actually to play an active role in the bigger pieces of policy out there, which really are what makes the state go, the finance issue of the state, the budget of the issue. It doesn't mean that you can't have interest in these other issues that are extremely important to women, extremely important to the individual women that come in. But you have to have a focus in the main line of issues too, and I think Deborah Price would probably agree with me on that, the main line of that, to be able to have your full impact on public policy. And so I think this is one of the things, and everybody kind of looks at the numbers and we haven't grown very much in women's representation in the legislature. To a little peak in the years I was there because I recruited women, or worked hard at recruiting women, but it's plateaued out. So we're still at about 25%, which is where we've been. But if more women don't run for office, vis-a-vis back to the Institute, we're not going to have more women that are capable of climbing that ladder and being in leadership.
You were the first president of the Ohio Casino Control Commission, and in fact, you shepherded it into existence. Ironically, you voted against casinos. And now, after watching and monitoring them from the inside, would you still vote against them?
Oh, probably. Our head of the casino here in Columbus is sitting right in front of me, so I'm having to be careful with my choice of words. No, Hibbert, thank you for being here today. It was, I think some of the concerns about casinos and their involvement with gangs and things of that sort is just not true. There's too much money involved. They can't take that risk, and they don't take that risk. So I have a different feeling about casinos, but it's the addiction issue, the gambling addiction issue, and much of the good advice I received from around the country when we were setting up the Ohio Casino Control Commission was to make that a priority. And I'm pleased to say, I think for the second or third year in a row, our prevention program in Ohio on gambling has been, together with Racing Commission, together with the lottery, has won the outstanding award in the country for the program that we have. So that's kind of my objections on that. But it was a learning experience for me to take and start up an agency that had no money, no staff, and no rent. or no money to rent anything, and no office. So I made that public statement one time, probably in your paper, and many of you know that the current budget director of Ohio, Tim Keene, he took a little offense about me saying that. He used to work with me, but it was true. We didn't have anything. So you had 7 members of the commission that had gotten confirmed. The first commission appointees, remember, did not get confirmed. And so we were wandering around there. My assistant, Linda Dodson, is here. So for a while, the staff of the commission was Linda and myself. So we found the room to meet. We did the agendas. We invited people in. But it was a great experience to start there, because I'm a firm believer that if you start something new like this on a really strong foundation, you will be able to keep it there. If you started, not in that situation, I have wonderful staff over there. I think everyone would even agree with that. Matt Schuler, who is our executive director. But I've been very, pleased to be able to recruit good people, and we've come a long way. We have a staff now of a little over 100 people from not having anyone. We have, most people don't know, out there we have agents and auditors and clerks in each one of the casinos. There's somebody in that office 24 hours a day, because we do provide the law enforcement from there. We didn't initially. Mike DeWine was good enough to actually provide BCI agents that did that for the first, but we decided that we had matured enough that we could manage this, so we've got great people to work with. And it has been a learning experience for me to be able to do that. Did we make some mistakes at the beginning? Yes. Do I think we made mistakes in the major areas, like the rules we developed? No, I think we adhered to that. And I would say to the legislature that gets a lot of criticism on a lot of things, they created a very good piece of legislation that is our guide. So I hope that the feeling around Ohio is that they're being properly regulated, and obviously they're contributing money to the schools and to our counties and to our cities, and they're providing for people that don't become addicted some entertainment that I think that they enjoy doing. So Hibbert, I'm not going to be all negative about casinos.
Over your many years of involvement, how has politics changed?
Well, it's getting to the fundamental of politics, which quite frankly, to me, comes down to actually running for office and electing the right people, that type of thing. Where politics has changed so much through the years has really been, what are the techniques of running a good campaign? A lot of people that haven't run a campaign for a while, when you get into it again, your eyes are open on how much more technical ability that you have to analyze the voters, to determine, where your votes are, to be able to deliver the messages to them in the right way. That's a whole different world. I had a judge one time who came to speak before a group of women in Franklin County. My chairman's over here. I have to be careful of him over there too. And so he stood up afterward, and we were in there sticking labels on envelopes. And he said, I can't tell you how much, we could not do without you women, because you label all of our mail pieces. I think my comment to him after that is, do you ever say anything like that again? You're not speaking before any group that I'm in charge of anyway, because that typically was how it was back then. But it's different than that now. As far as the recruitment of candidates and how candidates are chosen, there's not a whole lot of difference in that. It's still the structure at the county level, it's a structure at the state level, it's a structure in the political parties, it's a structure obviously in D.C. In my 4 years at Republican National Committee, were also a great learning experience for me. So I think that there's similarities, just as how candidates develop themselves, with the exception of all of the work that's being done by many of the women in this room to encourage more women to be part of that process. But I think as far as how you run a campaign, it's an entirely different world, and it's a world that is being so much affected by technology that it's really kind of hard to explain them. But going to the newspaper to get an endorsement, same thing.
Yeah. Unfortunately, they don't mean what they used to mean.
That's true.
As you look over our political system, what reforms would you recommend? And specifically, what do you think about term limits? Do we need redistricting reform? Which might be harder for you because Republicans control everything.
Well, I think term limits were one of the bad things that happened to Ohio politics in the legislature. I think now they've been in effect long enough that you can see the negative results of them. I'm a realist. I've looked at the polls. I don't think there's any chance of repealing them. Most of the states that enacted term limits by their legislature have since done away with them, but ours is locked into the Constitution, and I don't see a vote that would actually repeal that. I do think there's a good opportunity, and we were developing that through the Constitutional Modernization Commission, which has now been dissolved. Some proposals to take a look at. I think where we were coming down was the fact of trying to extend it from 8 to 12 years, which would make a difference, which would give people still the opportunity to sit on the back bench when they're first elected and get to know the system before they jump right into the middle of things and feel that urgency to introduce bills and to do this and to do that. And so I don't know, former Representative Beatty is here, whether he agrees with me or not, but we did make some recommendations out of our subcommittee. The commission did not take them up. But I think the governor feels, as you know, very strongly about doing away with term limits too. Governor Voinovich felt very strongly about doing away with term limits. So and I may have misquoted Governor Kasich. He feels very strongly about the redistricting issue, but we've already handled that for the legislature, and you'll see that go and play for the next election to the legislature, but it's not been done yet for congressional districts. So I think there's a hope there. I think it would be helpful. I think it would help build this, working together atmosphere much more than we have it right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you on term limits, even though when I was a reporter, State House reporter at the Blade, I wrote columns saying they were necessary, and after watching them work, or more appropriately not work, I'm against them. I can think of no other endeavor where we do not value experience.
I know. I agree.
But we'll move on. You're a close confidant of Governor Kasich. He's out there. And do you think he'll take on Donald Trump in the Republican primary in 2020? And if not, what do you see next for him?
I honestly don't have any idea whether he's thinking of doing that or whether he would do it. It was very obvious that he did not want to run for the U.S. Senate. I think he said, been there, done that, as far as the years that he spent as a member of Congress. But I think that he does rightfully have a great deal of pride in some of the things that he's been able to do as governor of Ohio that he thinks would be good for other states or other local communities or to be done at the national level. And I think he will continue to have a platform to speak out on some of those accomplishments, whether it, as much as Medicaid is, a very complicated issue. Ohio has done one of those remarkable jobs of actually handling Medicaid, and actually with the theory that we pay for results. We don't pay for procedures, we pay for results. And so I think we can stand on having a very high ranking. He obviously has strong feelings on health care because he's a governor on the front line. The people that are debating it at the national level obviously most of them have never had that experience of having that responsibility in your own state on delivering the right kind of services. I thought there was a particularly good article in the paper this week that talked about what he had done and the program he has done to get people out of nursing homes who don't really need to be in nursing homes, send them to their own home, provide them for the services that they get there at probably a 50% less cost than what it would be if they would be in a nursing home. So I think he has that passion. I don't think he's ever lost the passion since I met him when he was about 25 years old, and couldn't wait to actually run for office, and visited with me when I was working with the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. And I think he maybe thought I was going to run for an empty Senate seat that was coming up. So he came over to visit with me. And we had an interesting conversation. I had no idea that I was ever going to run for that Senate seat, but I didn't tell him, so. I think he's forgiven me for that. Mr. Chairman, you didn't hear that story, okay?
Next year we have a governor's race.
Yes, sir.
And there are 4 well-known Republicans already vying. We've got Lieutenant Governor Mary Taylor, Attorney General Mike DeWine, Secretary of State John Husted, and Representative Jim Renee. How do you handicap that race?
I'm not going to. But I've worked very closely with 3 of those candidates through the years. I've not worked very much with Congressman Renacci, but I certainly have worked with Mary Taylor and with Mike DeWine and with John Husted. I think they are all made good candidates. I think we're well served by people that have all already proven their ability to handle responsibility in the state positions that they have. So it is, I'm obviously staying neutral in this. I may decide as we get closer to the election to move in some direction. I'm just pleased that we've got that quality of people running on the Republican ticket for governor. I'm very pleased that they are willing to go out there, and it's tough to run. It's tough to run at the local level. Think of what it is to run at the state level. We're a big state, and we are a complicated state politically. So it's really tough to go out there and be willing to put your name on the ballot and work for, a year and a half or 2 years for the people to give you a chance. I guess it all comes to an end at the primary, but they've been out there working for a period of time, and so I'm really pleased to see that. I think that the other thing, I think all of our candidates for governor are out there. I don't happen to think all of the candidates for the Democrats are necessarily out there, with the rumor about Richard Cordray and his possibility of returning to Ohio. As you know, he was a former Attorney General, and he's been in D.C. with the consumer group. He may be wanting to come back to Ohio. And I believe, Deborah, that was the person you ran for the first time you ran against for the first time she ran for Congress. And so I remember walking the streets in Canal Winchester on parades with you, and so we were running against Rich, and then I served 1 term with him in the Ohio legislature. So we will see. It's going to be a competitive races, no matter who's in it, one way or the other. And off-year elections are always unpredictable as far as voter turnout, things like that. I could ask Terry to stand up and tell us what he thinks, but then we might be here for a little while. I get started on that, so I don't think I will. But I respect Terry. I've always said that if I'm in a, if I'm in a real street fight, I want Terry Casey with me. Okay.
Would you care to give your opinion about which Democrat, I don't want to say scares you, but would you think would be the best candidate? I
don't know the Democrat candidates as well. I know Betty Sutton served with me in the House a number of years ago when I was fairly early in my House career. And Connie Pillich served in the House after I left, so I really don't have a good handle on their Senator Schiavone. I don't really have a good handle on that, Joe. I'm not begging off that question. I just don't think that I'm capable of making that kind of. Nan Whaley I have not met, but I know she gets high marks for the leadership she's giving in Dayton. So I think that they're going to be 2 really focused primaries next year as we get to that. Can I go back with one question I kind of slipped by? But it reminded me of it when we were talking about, and I've obviously, and we talked about asking who were my heroes. my heroes in Republican politics, in politics. And when you said George Voinovich's name, it made me remember that I didn't mention that. I think I'd say my heroes were the governors that I have worked with at some point in my life, which would be George Voinovich, very, very unusual guy. Still, his book just came out. You and I talked about that the other day, which is a manual. It's not a biography. It's a manual they give to local government officials so they know some of the kind of things that they can do that help them. And he visited, before his death, he went out and visited every new mayor in the state of Ohio that had been elected in that previous election, Republican or Democrat. Obviously, I've already told you my close association with John Kasich. He was my, actually he was my congressman, he was my state senator. And it's something to show, just as a, encouraged to kind of tell personal stories. John Kasich was first elected. He was elected to the Senate. And it was right in the year of reapportionment. And he got, the districts got drawn differently here in Ohio. And he ended up in a Senate district with a longtime senator, Senator Ted Gray. And he said, Senator, this is your, which shows you what can happen with that, because when Senator Gray was first elected, he was living on the border of Indiana. Now he's over in Franklin County in the middle of the state. John stepped out of the race, Ted ran, was elected, and John ran for Congress that time, which everybody thought was a throwaway race. But it wasn't a throwaway race, and he was obviously the only, I believe, Republican elected to Congress that defeated an incumbent Democrat across the country. But then also Bob Taft, who I have a great deal of respect for. I served for 2 years with Bob Taft and for 4 years with George Voinovich as Speaker. You really get to know the heart of the person there and what they really believe is good for Ohio. So those are my heroes, the people I worked with, and the people I deeply respect.
We'll move to audience questions in just a couple of minutes, so don't be shy about stepping up to the microphone over there. Before we get to that, let me ask you about President Donald Trump. What do you think about him and his presidency?
Well, if certainly his approach to this is not a typical kind of approach to a presidency. It has, and I think that's what throws a lot of people off in the way he handles those responsibilities. We all have a prototype in our mind, and he probably doesn't quite fit in that. I do think on many issues, he's got the issues identified correctly that need to be addressed. And I think as you are looking at some of the things with the good economy that we are experiencing right now, some of that really is in anticipation of some consideration of some tax reform that is difficult for, obviously, some of our major corporations. And quite frankly, some of it is based upon getting rid of some of the business regulations that tie the hands of many of these businesses and being able to create more jobs. I think on the healthcare issue and their inability to do anything, I think you need to look back on what was happening when Obama was in the works of trying to get that passed. I believe that took the president with much more, supporters in the U.S. Senate. It probably took him well over a year to get that passed, get that enacted, and so Trump still has a few more days in office to be able to accomplish that. I hope for the sake of the country and quite frankly for the sake of my party that many of these things that really need to be done can be accomplished. And I think obviously what I was chuckling when you got the fake news t-shirt. I want to see you wearing that. John, what do you think?
The next commission meeting.
There you go. John covers the commission too. But I do think that this ongoing fight between the media and the president is distracting from anything else being, and I'm not pointing out, there's just a conflict there, and it gets much more difficult every day.
Okay. If anybody has any questions, feel free to go to the mic over there. Yes, ma'am.
Marion Harris. Last year, I took a medication. It was $3 a month. This year, it's $42 a month. I would like to know what your position is, your thoughts are on issue 2.
Marion, my position on issue 2 is I'm part of the team that is trying to defeat it, because I don't think it will accomplish the goals that people believe it will accomplish. For one thing, the situation of basing prices of drugs on what the VA has given. The VA has given a legislative reduction in that price. So there it could have just the opposite impact, because they're already getting a 24% reduction in the drugs that they fit. So taking that and then trying to use it as a basis of that, first of all, they don't publish it. Secondly, they actually negotiate, quite frankly, for other discounts from the pharmaceutical firms and get them, as does the state of Ohio actually have some ongoing negotiations with drug companies. My concern is, if we're going to do something about drug prices, let's do it in a way that we will know will work. Let's do it so that everybody can participate in that. Because the way this is drafted, there would be probably over 7 million of Ohio's population that wouldn't be under it at all. So the people that are buying their own insurance, that types of things, private insurance. So I think it needs, I agree with you, it needs work, it needs some change. I just don't think this is the right answer to the issue.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Charles Bluestone. Madam Speaker, you spoke about your heroes in politics here in Ohio. My hero is Betty Montgomery, who was the greatest Attorney General that the state has ever had, and one of the greatest politicians here in Ohio. I have 2 quick questions for you, Madam Speaker. Talk about the role of money, particularly in light of Citizens United. At my law office, I receive phone calls every week from candidates and office holders asking for donations. I'd rather see them focusing on issues rather than campaign raising activities. And Mr. Hallett, talk about, if you would very briefly, the role of newspapers in the next decade, and where do you see that happening, if I may ask you?
The role of money is important to somebody that's trying to sell themselves as a candidate to have a very important job of developing public policy. And if you put it in perspective, and this may have been a viewpoint that was provided to me by somebody in the room, they spend an awful lot of money trying to convince you to buy a certain kind of toothpaste, right? Because they want your business.
Right.
Only thing a politician is asking for you to give them a chance to hear their message. And in today's world, it takes a lot of money to do that. There are all sorts of ways that have been tried. You know, there were limitations. There are limitations still on how much money that you can give directly to a candidate's committee. If you try to actually higher limitations, there's always a way, I've been learned through my many years now here of experience, that money kind of flows like the stream. It finds the way around any one of this. As far as the Citizens United case, as far as the formation of some of those groups, I think that there's nothing wrong with those groups, but I think they need to be monitored very closely, because they are a new entity out there, and every politician I know is forming one of them. But they're primarily for educational purposes, and there are strict restrictions on how much they can use for advocacy. And so I think that that's something that, knowing that there was a little bit more policing, and I understand that the Federal Elections Committee is not doing that anymore, but that IRS is doing it, that ought to scare everybody who's involved with 501c4s. So I understand your point of view, and I share your feeling about Ms. Montgomery. She's been a very good friend of me, and unfortunately she didn't serve in my House of Representatives, so that's made a little difference.
I love newspapers. I was fortunate to spend 42 years working in the newspaper business, and it was a wonderful career. I got to see the world on somebody else's dime and felt proud of the work we did. I am heartened now to see that the New York Times, since the election of President Trump, has gained 250,000 new subscribers. The Washington Post is well up there too. I think that the national newspapers, although they're struggling, have a better chance of surviving than mid-level newspapers like the one in this city, which I love dearly. It's not good times for the newspaper business. You know, it used to be you'd pick up the paper on a Sunday and 70% were ads and 30% were news. We'd build the news, the news hole would depend on how the ads were built on the page, and now it's the opposite. It's maybe 30% ads. And so the newspapers have had to rely on subscription revenue to survive, and that's why the price is going up. And I really fear for our democracy when we no longer have newspapers, and I'm afraid that day is coming. There is nothing more important, and I, you know, I'm a big, despite what the president and others say about the New York Times or the Post, they're invaluable resources to our country and to the world, frankly.
I agree. Thank you very much.
Hello, Madam Speaker. My name is R.J. Richmond. It's always a pleasure to be in the presence of a great woman such as yourself. My question for you is, what's the best advice you have for a young man, not a woman, who wants to get started in Ohio politics, short of a sex change? Thank you.
Well, man or woman, I'm glad to see young people stepping up and showing that they have an interest in being involved in the political system. And the best advice I have for you is to seek the advice of a few people who you know. They're most willing to sit down and talk with you, tell you a little bit about their personal story, but also to just get involved. And people will say to me, well, how do I get involved? I said, you just show up. Okay, if you show up for a candidate, and about the third time you show up, they'll ask you to chair their volunteers or chair their yard signs, or I mean, they will. So you kind of have to make your own way through it. But there are a number of people in this room who would sit down and talk with you. Otto certainly would, I would, Betty would, a lot of other people, Terry would, Jim Tilling would, lots of people here that were willing, and Deborah probably has done a lot of that herself. So we spend a lot of our time trying to encourage young people and trying to give them good advice, because sometimes the errors you make at the beginning follow you all the way through your political career. So it's important to not bump into some of those problems. So just give me a call. I'd be happy to talk to you.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Joanna. I work for Planned Parenthood. Perhaps piggybacking off a question from the moderator, what do you see as the primary barriers to more women running, and how do we address those barriers? Thank you.
Well, the barriers that I've identified, frankly, is they don't have enough confidence in their own ability. They don't like to raise money and are not particularly good at it. Now, they can go out and raise money for the cancer, efforts. They can raise money for the hospital that they can do that. But when it comes to sitting across the desk for some CEO and asking for money for themselves, that comes difficult for them. But the more self-confidence they do. And I think the other thing, quite frankly, is risk adverse. They want to be, I recruited a woman, gave it all I had, gave her a written proposal of what I'd do for her, and her final question to me was, if you can guarantee I'll get elected, I'll run. Well, there's no guarantee in life, so you have to take the risk if you truly believe that you want more women's voices in the, developing a public policy. Uh-oh, now I'm in real trouble.
Madam Speaker, awfully good to see you again today. And as I was sitting over there, I was trying to remember who beat me up the worst. You or Vern Rife, but and I think it was Vern. Well, no, in all seriousness, though, one of the key issues that I see right now is the lack of bipartisanship. And I remember serving under you, different party, but I also remember having some absolutely wonderful conversations with people like you and Jim Tilling, sometimes Betty when I could get her. And they were very valuable and they were substantive. Do you have any suggestions as to what we can do to kind of get back to bipartisanship? Because that's one of the huge divides that I see right now.
Otto, I wish I knew the answer to that. I do think term limits has made it worse rather than making it better. I even think such things as the office space that are given to legislators are so different now that they're kind of isolated. Gosh, when I was a freshman, I was in the basement with about 30 other members in space that was probably enough for 10, and so we were forced to, but we were also close to the Democrats. I also think, quite frankly, that I'd never thought I'd say this publicly, but there's not a good watering hole downtown Columbus, Ohio. Okay? Let's take it with this. Because that's where they used to gather after committee meetings or after late session nights. I always tried to have a caucus before that happened because it was better to do that before they went to the watering hole. But anyway, they would always gather there, and that's where a lot of the relationships were built. And so, and I want to, I just have to say, when I said, no, I'm in trouble. When I was, you know, when you're speaker, you can look out over the whole house so you can see every member. Whenever Otto Beatty stood up to go to the back of the room, I would have to call one of the pages up and say, tell Randy Gardner or tell Bill Batchelder to come here, because I knew what he was doing. He's a quick study, he reads a bill, he sees an opportunity to amend it, and he goes to the back to have the amendment prepared, and I have no idea what he's going to do. So, but I admired your ability to be able to do that, Otto, and I still do.
Well, I appreciate that. But one of the things that I don't see now is you personally always had an open door policy and allowed us, us being the Democrats in the House when you were leader, to come in and talk to you about things and let you know our positions. Whether you agreed with it or not, at least you listened. And as I understand what's going on in Washington right now especially, that just doesn't happen. Now, maybe I'm a little prejudiced because of my wife, but that just doesn't happen anymore. And as I travel around this state on business, I see a real divide in this state that really concerns me. And I hope that we can get back to having bipartisan discussions to work on issues in this state. So many of us around the state appreciate your open door policies that you always had. So thanks a million.
We just have to remember that Republicans don't have all of the good ideas. Democrats don't have all of the good ideas, but when we can come together, maybe we really have a good idea. And Otto, I think I'm going to put some of the pressure on Trevor Brown over here, because he's going to be developing a new leadership institute for lawmakers, and maybe to help them to understand the value of doing that, frankly, before they get too embedded in the partisanship down there, because we miss it. There's no question about that. And so I'd like to see a lot of it return. And like you, we've got to look for ways for that to happen. So Trevor, not to pressure you or anything, but we're going to look to you to help us on that.
You both serve as great role models.
Thank you.
Carol, you get the last word.
Okay.
Madam Speaker, over the years you've given much good advice. Many people have listened to your advice and counsel. You're a good communicator. You've talked about communications. What advice would you give the White House about government by tweet?
That is a little out of my pay level, my pay range on that one, because I think, first of all, they've got to get, and I hope the new chief of staff is able to, you know, get more unanimity in that. There's just too much. It's hard enough to be the president of this country without having all of that other confusion around you. I'm hoping that they'll work towards having that under control, and I think there's some good signs on that happening, Carol. I think it would be good for everybody if that were the case.
Well, thank you all. I hope you enjoyed today's forum as much as I did. You can view today's forum and share it with others on CTV Columbus Television, on WOSU and the PBS affiliate statewide through the Ohio channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. So let's thank again all our sponsors, Ice Miller, the Capitol Square Foundation in cooperation with the John Glenn College of Public Affairs, and our speakers, Joe Hallett and Joanne Davidson. And thanks all of you for being here. We look forward to seeing you next week and every Wednesday. You have to eat somewhere. Make it the Metropolitan Club of Columbus. Thank you all.